Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are here in the Sanctum Secorum reading room once more. And for our listeners and viewers, whether you are new to the literary world of Appendix N, a diehard fan of the genre, or even just tuning in to see how certain titles tie into a particular set of role-playing games, we invite you to join us as we dive into the history and influence of Appendix N. We'd like to open our libraries to you and inspire readers to explore these new worlds. And tonight, as many of you know, we are continuing our exploration of the women of Appendix N. We're going to be talking about Gertrude Bennett, writing as Frances Stevens, and her 1918 novel, The Citadel of Fear. I am Jen Brinkman, and my illustrious co-host would be Bob.
Hey, everybody.
And Bob, you're our great SynOp guy.
After a journey through the harsh Mexican desert nearly claims their lives, two Irish-American prospectors discover a dense jungle where a lost race of Aztecs is rumored to remain. In Tlapayan, lost city of an ancient race, lay the black stone of evil incarnate. Left with two options, to return home through the treacherous sands or continue into the unknown. Only one man escapes, and his actions haunt him as the consequences of his choices follow him across the country, forcing him to enter and confront the Citadel of Fear.
And we have a note here that is worth sharing, that this was originally serialized in Argosy in 1918, but this story is still in print over 100 years later.
Yes, and it is.
As mentioned last month, the author's story itself is what really pulled me into this. And she's as interesting as the story she wrote, which, as it turns out, are pretty good.
Yes, I would say that calling Citadel of Fear very good or really good is a huge understatement.
Discredit, perhaps.
Oh my God, the story is amazing, right? Yes, but let's talk about Gertrude Bennett for a minute.
I mean, there are parts of her life that are a little horrific and mysterious, just like parts of her books.
She was born September 18th, 1884, passed away February 2nd, 1948, which was kind of young, but even for the time, that was sort of young. But in the vein of being young, she wrote her first short story at the age of 17, The Curious Experience of Thomas Dunbar, and she sold that story and went on to be published in 1904 Argosy magazine under the name G.M. Barrows.
Right. And that was published just before some poetry, which was also using her own name. And that's pretty much where the use of her last name stopped being associated with these publications.
Right. And the poetry, I think, was published just like a month or two later in a different magazine. But what's really kind of cool about that first publication in G.M. Barrows, so yes, using her initials hides the fact that she's a woman from the readers of the time, but it's also the earliest known instance of an American female author publishing science fiction under her own name. And that's it's a weird factoid to come across, stunning. Right? Yeah, it is. It's one of those things where you take it for granted that, yeah, okay, well, women a lot of times use pseudonyms, but sometimes they publish under their own names. And
right. And just for our viewer, Sky 2, we'll take a little bit longer to talk about the author right now because they're still finishing the book. I found it really interesting to learn that She was only educated through 8th grade. She had to
Oh,
leave
wow.
school to help support her family. There was a lot of death in her family, and she was actually working in the office of a department store when she wrote that first novel when she was 17.
For a second, I was kind of stunned that someone who had only gotten that far in education could write so well. But then I go back to letters written home during the Civil War, and I realize that really education today does not reflect education then.
And there are reports of her parents being interested in literature, and so there were probably plenty of things from the late 1800s available to her at home to read.
She had to be a reader just based on some of the information that's in this book.
Right. The briefest synopsis I could find on that first novel was that it was about a man who survives a car accident, wakes up in a scientist's lab, and gains super strength through a mishap with a new element. So it could be put forth that this is one of the origins for superheroes too.
Well, yeah, that's I had an accident with something radioactive is like half the origins of early superheroes.
1900, there we have it.
Now, it wasn't until 1952 that anybody learned that Frances Stevens, the author of The Citadel of Fear, was Gertrude Bennett. It took that long. It wasn't until after her death that she ever got credit for this story, linked to her personally.
Wasn't this the third, maybe the second or third piece that was actually published through?
This was originally published through Argosy.
This was through Argosy. Later in 1917, the next time she published fiction was the story The Nightmare, put through All Story Weekly was the name of the periodical. And she requested the pen name of Jean Veil, Veil. It was rejected, and the editor put it forth under a different name.
Yeah.
These are the things in life that are infuriating, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But so she lived and died before most of, or probably all of the major awards that we think of when we're looking at science fiction and fantasy. But the critics of the time, Sam Moskowitz was like the historian of science fiction until he passed away. And he said that she was the greatest woman writer of science fiction in the period between Mary Shelley and C.L. Moore. And for the time, that was considered high praise. I would say that she is probably one of the greatest writers of science fiction in the period between that. I would take out the modifier there, because her stuff is frankly astonishingly good. This particular story in my brain, reading, oh, hey, there's this lost tribe, immediately linked to an H.P. Lovecraft story of a very similar vein. And this is far superior to anything that Lovecraft ever wrote. And I say this as a person that has read everything that Lovecraft has ever written repeatedly. This is just astoundingly good.
On that note, scholar Gary Hoppenstad was the one who originally said H.P. Lovecraft was the progenitor of dark fantasy. And he has since recanted that, putting Gertrude Bennett in that place.
Which makes sense. She came first, right?
By about a decade.
Yeah.
About a decade before Call of Cthulhu was published.
And really, I mean, the term dark fantasy was coined later, and two people coined the term, and they couldn't really agree on what it was originally. But now that it has been kind of codified and is solid, you look back and yes, it is certainly not Lovecraft. This is an author who influenced Lovecraft and influenced Merritt. And The
Right.
combination of horror and dread along with fantasy tones is what dark fantasy is. Lovecraft really didn't involve a whole lot of well, I mean, it obviously wasn't realism, but his stuff was really more horror than fantasy to begin with. There's shades there.
That's fair. That's fair. Whereas
But
Merritt is definitely, skirting that horror edge. I did find a quote from the editors of Weird Tales in 1974, listing her in the era of great scientific romancers, right up there with Burroughs, George Allen England, with whom I'm not familiar, A. Merritt, and of course listing her as Frances Stevens, which is another just kind of raising my fist against everything.
It's a shame she did not get the recognition that she deserved while she was alive. But wow, the materials that she wrote are just they stand on their own. They really do.
Right, and that would be between 5 novels and 7 short stories or novellas, if you will.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck on her own personal tragic story, especially as we start to think about what happens in the Citadel of Fear. Her husband died just a year after they got married, leaving her with a newborn. And that's one of the reasons she went back to writing full time and was so prevalent in the pulps at that point, because she had to support her kid. But he died while on an underwater treasure hunting expedition near Florida. Reports can't agree whether it was, a shipwreck collision or if they were overtaken by a tropical storm. But
death by misadventure.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just a little.
My God, yeah. Now that
kind of puts things together with the story, right?
Her husband died on a treasure hunting expedition. It took me. I'm not firing on all cylinders, but that finally clicked. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I certainly see the influences of life and art.
Yeah. And then there was also the point of, around, what was it? Less than 20 years after that, she had her friends take care of her daughter and finish raising her, and she just up and left and went to California, and it became a mystery herself at that point.
Yeah, she was not necessarily the warmest of mothers. Ditch your kid and leave and refuse all contact after.
Yeah, there was speculation of, did she die in 1939 when that letter was returned as undeliverable to her daughter or from her daughter? Or did she die in 48? And burial records put it in 48. So
does Social Security, yeah.
It's like a 9-year difference. That's a long period of estrangement.
And well, and she just sort of dropped off the face of the earth. Right? I mean,
and possibly remarried. But yeah, 1923 was the last time anyone saw anything from her, and that was in Weird Tales.
So speaking of tales, right?
Well, speaking of tales, she herself was inspired by Poe. She inspired all these others. Before we get into the specific little details, there are 2 words I want to bring up from the story that are mentioned in succession and made me wonder who else she may have inspired by mentioning what.
I don't think that it was an influence, but go ahead because it did make me do a double take when I saw it at first as well.
Given Margaret St. Clair's tendencies to also lean on some Celtic mythology, talking about these shadow people in this context really got my little wheels running.
I did
my little
think
hamsters.
I thought that was a neat link, and I would ask that out in the audience there, those of you that are here with us tonight, I wonder how you feel this story read. To me, this felt like this felt more like a contemporarily written story. It didn't seem, when you read a lot of stories from like the 50s and early 60s or earlier, the language always, there's a definite difference in the language, in the structure, and it can be somewhat jarring at times. And this felt like anything I would have read, well, like in the early 70s, right, when I was growing up. It felt like it did not feel like it was written 100 years ago.
Exactly. Well, Tony Hogarth says people used to write, emphasis his.
Yes, they did. People also used to read.
Yeah, well, and exactly. Sky 2 asks, what about her influences? I'm picking up possibly some Hodgson vibes, but definitely Edgar Allan Poe was a stated influence of hers.
Yeah,
one of her short stories mirrors the Cask of Amontillado, apparently.
Well, and I can certainly see picking up an Arthur Machen vibe from this, but she didn't really state a whole lot of influences because, well, let's face it, nobody was really talking to her and publishing it. It was all about Francis Stevens, and so not a whole lot was stated by the alias Mr. Stevens.
Now, it didn't. I agree with Sky 2 in that it didn't feel contemporary for me, but that was simply because of the setting.
Well, I'd like to point out that 1970s, that that's 50 years ago. That's not, I suppose, not. It was contemporary for me. Okay, I'm old. Sky 2 didn't need to point out that I'm old.
1918 was not contemporary for you, dear.
No, but it really did. It felt like the stuff that I was reading in the 70s. It felt like it could have been written by Niven or Asimov. That level of language, but with that fluidity of prose.
Yes. Now, I would, just to share, we ended up with the version from Mint Publishing, which is kind of ironic, which was published in just last year, I think, but it's a direct reprinting.
Oh yeah, because it's in the public domain.
As an editor myself, I would just like to have a moment of appreciation for this glorious, glorious thing, the table of contents. I have to geek out for a minute here.
Geek out.
The organization of how the pieces of this story were put together are just freaking brilliant. First off, the first 9 chapters, that's the part that hooks you into the book. That's the action. That there are so many points where you want to tell them to wait, stop moving, take a look around, show me what's around, but you're left with, but wait, I was over here. The action just won't stop, and that's really the crux of what gets you in. And just about chapter 10, the story shifts radically from the surreal Aztec city to an ordinary, at least back then, American suburb of the time, right? But the madness is still there.
Well, let's not talk about shift. Yeah, I would say let's not talk about shifting from Act 1 until we talk about Act 1. Right?
Well, no, that chapter 10 is the last chapter of Act 1.
Yeah, I understand that. Let's talk about Act 1.
It's kind of an epilogue into itself, because you think, okay, they're back home, everything is fine, and oh no, everything is certainly not fine. Oh, and that's the end of this act.
But what's interesting, hang on, because what's very interesting is that's not where the story would have broken when it was being published in Argosy, though. Right? It was published. It was published over 7 weeks. It was essentially 4 chapters per week. So
it was, you would have had 9, 10 installments.
Right. You would have had 9, 10, 11, and 12 would have been one portion. Right. So you would have had that. You would have had that shift mid-issue. It reads so it reads very differently in the book format. In the book format, it's broken down like a film in 3 acts.
Right. And
But
it's 10, 10, and then the remainder. And it's brilliantly broken down in this format. I don't know how I would have liked it in the serialized form, breaking it down into 4 chapters. Wow. Okay, now I got to see what chapter 5 was, because that was.
well, let's talk about the story here. Let's talk about this. I mean, the introduction of our two main characters at the beginning, Colin O'Hara and Archer Kennedy. I don't know. I never liked Archer Kennedy. Archer Kennedy just always seemed kind of like a worm and a weasel. And so
he was totally useless like the first 2 chapters. Well, he was unconscious.
It wasn't just that though. He wasn't nice. There was a shade of sinister to his actions at the beginning, and so I immediately gravitated to Colin O'Hara. Yes. So, but you've got these 2 Irishmen out in the desert, and I want to say, as an Irishman, you would not get me wandering around the desert. You put me on a beach, I'm like a fork in the microwave. So the idea of 2 Irishmen wandering the Mexican desert was a little hard to swallow at first.
No, she did explain that that's pretty much what happened to Boots.
Yes, she did, and that's what she totally won me over to the Irishman in the desert.
And he bore the weight of Kennedy for the majority of these chapters.
Well, right. So he carries them through the desert, and then like so many other literary pieces before, right? Shangri-La and others. All of a sudden, there's this mysterious place that has no business being there, and they essentially come across this massive hacienda with orchards, and that's not what one finds in the desert.
And it was deserted, or it was
mostly
quiet,
deserted. Yeah, it was very quiet,
except for the owner and his daughter, who gravitated towards Boots because Boots was the nice man.
Yes,
Children
he was.
know these things.
And so as we then get introduced to another person who is wholly out of place in the middle of the Mexican desert, right? Sven Bjornsson, right? So we've got two Irishmen and a Norseman walk into the Mexican desert. I don't know what the punchline is yet. And the punchline is it gets really spooky. But there's just this incongruity to these characters in that location, so that when we get a little further, what I found was as we discover this lost or hidden city with its guardians, because the characters already felt so out of place, for me it made this fantastic setting seem natural and fitting. Mm-hmm. Right. And so
that's why I wanted to know more about it, but they weren't allowed to explore more.
Well, not a whole lot, right? But but from what we got, we were told how the various factions that served the various gods, who they spoke of in the present tense, right? No, he will do bad things to you. They spoke of them not only in the present tense, but like they were part of the family that was present, like they were a grandfather, like they were a real person. And that also kind of sets a tone, with the weird, 10-foot tall white guardians and the giant hounds and the strange river
of the gods. And on behalf of Quetzalcoatl, I claim this man. And the retort was, Quetzalcoatl was once a mere man himself. And that just kind of sent my brain spinning for a while too. So they're trying to say that all of the gods started as white men, and that because it was not just a man but a white man,
right? But they weren't white men, they were white men. And there's like
the difference. Guardians, okay,
like they're made of marble.
Okay, that's another take on that. I'll buy it.
Well, and speaking of coloration, again in the comments, Tony Hart and Tony Hogarth always there with the observations. Archer Kennedy is small and dark. He's Black Irish, right? Which is different from black and Irish. They're black Irish.
Right.
And Boots, though, Boots, he is the stereotypical strapping red-headed lad from like Carrie that carries the sheep home.
He's the Fawford.
He is.
And
he is the Fawford pre-Fawford. And
Yes.
and I love it when he's like, oh, well, we need to escape. They've been thrown into a cell. They need to escape. And he's like, okay, well, I'll just pound the crap out of the guy. And that is exactly what he does. Tired, weak. He's like, okay, well, this is, and that is sort of the running theme through the entire book is, well, there's a gun right there, but I'll just pound the crap out of the guy. And
can I just say how well this would play for DCC? Just throwing that out there.
It is in public domain. I'll stress that again. It's in the public domain. But yeah, I mean, he almost felt like a modern predecessor to the sword and sorcery heroes like Conan or others written by Howard, maybe especially in his boxing tales. You just have this big guy who, no matter what is coming at him, is like, okay, well, something weird is happening. I'll punch it until it stops moving.
Yeah.
and it works. Not always well, weapons. But it works.
Even later in life, he was eschewing the weapons. If it wasn't something he could handle with his own fists, it wasn't worth handling.
Right.
I gotta respect that.
And he's described as being so big that something like a pistol looked small and funny in his hands anyway. Right. So you get,
it was like 6'8" or something.
Yeah, he is a mountain of a man. And they
hinted some supernatural something or other in his Celtic heritage too.
Yeah, it was like great grandpa married a fairy.
Something like that. Yeah. So speaking of Sven Bjornsson, didn't he marry a fairy too?
Well,
what would you call her?
Well, the residents were people, though, right? I mean, he didn't marry one of the guardians.
No, but even the women glowed.
Well, no, they had glowing moths. That description.
The moth woman.
Yeah. That description, there was part of it that really weirded me out because it was like, yes, so these glowing moths, I wonder if they're attached to her, like women of the Caribbean attach fireflies to their hair. And that just sort of stopped me dead for a minute. It's like, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of looking if women in the Caribbean ever actually tied fireflies to their hair, because it's such a great image anyway, right?
It is.
Although,
I mean,
how are you gonna? The string would just bring them right down, right? I mean, what are you going to use?
This is written after her husband died, looking for buried treasure.
Yes, that was the connection. It took me a little while to make earlier.
maybe there's a bit of but around the Caribbean, around the Floridian area there. Speaking of, I'm curious because Boots fell in the water in Tlalopian.
Yeah.
Is there any connection between the hell that he felt and her husband's fate? Learning her husband's fate really just put these pieces together for me.
Well, and when he first fell into the water and he was in lots of pain, I immediately thought, well, it's probably salt water, right? I mean, this guy's beaten, he's scratched, he's bloodied. Anybody that's ever gone swimming in the Gulf of Mexico with open wounds, ow. But then someone else gets thrown in, right? And they're terrified of being thrown in, and it's the water itself is just almost alive with current, that underlying edge of power that is never explained, but is so terrifyingly present. So it very well could be. It could be a reflection of her husband went out onto the water and never came back, and so the water is personified as dangerous in her mind.
And then you had the storms out there as well that just made everything. He didn't know which way to turn.
Well, and then getting back to her education for a minute, right? I want to say that for someone in the pre-internet age who was born in Minneapolis, her understanding of Mexican mythology is better than a lot of the people that I met while we were in Mexico. Tezcatlipoca is a particular favorite dark deity of mine. I've written Lovecraftian adventures using him as one of the faces of Nyarlathotep, and so the moment I saw that, I lit up. And
right. She was working as a professor's secretary at the University of Pennsylvania after her husband died. It was one of the jobs she took.
Oh, that is true.
Before she had to completely go back to working from home because she had to care for her disabled mother afterwards. Yeah. Baby and mom all at the same time.
But such a great
understanding these days. Yeah.
And the way that, well, I'll talk about the gods more later.
I mean,
but this,
are we still in Act 1?
Well, we kind of are at the moment, right? This first act ends with our true hero, right? Colin O'Hara.
He is escaping
into the desert, and we don't really get the description of his journey so much as he leaves and then wow, he was found near dead.
Right. And at least in this edition, chapter 10 opens with him having gone back, and they completely gloss over it there, but he's gone back and he had collected the Quetzalcoatl figurine that had been hanging in the house, in the ranch house. And that house had been completely empty, possibly partially demolished by the time that he'd gone back. So we go from him being let out blindfolded to a spot so that he can never find this magical city again, and his friend being kept there as punishment. Well, partner. The very next scene we have is 15 years later, he's presenting this figurine to his sister.
Right. So
there's a lot of travel that we don't get into.
Yeah. So that transition was startling, right?
It was a little jarring.
I had no idea.
All of a sudden, we're in suburbia.
Well, and I had no idea what I was getting into when I started reading the book. So I'm like, okay, well, we've got this story. All right, we're in the Mexican desert. We're dealing with these hidden gods and their guardians. Great. Okay, I'm in for this ride. Wait. Why? But why are we taking the exit? What? No. Why? I want. And exactly. So the story veered off in a direction I wholly didn't see coming, and overall I greatly enjoyed that. The story took turns that I didn't expect. But they weren't jarring. I mean, no, yes, a time jump of 15 years is a little unusual when I'm reading something, but it didn't feel like 15 years, right?
And Act 1 ends with something obviously supernaturally driven visiting the home of his sister.
The first visitation. And boy, seeing that chapter heading, the first visitation. You don't need foreshadowing when you're just directly telling people, yeah, there's a lot more to come. It just gets worse from here.
No, I would like to go on record as saying that the women in this story are not helpless creatures, and that is so refreshing. They're concerned for the men around them, and again, possibly mirroring her real life. But aside from the occasional failed sanity check, which happens for the men just as easily, I really appreciated the portrayal of Collins's sister Cleona.
Right, which is simply Colin scrambled with an A at the end. And that I think kind of tells you quite a bit about the character. She is not she's not as physically burly, but she is certainly as strong in her own way. She has the same level of courage. These are siblings. They are very much alike in so many important ways. And yeah, during that first visitation, when something is smashing its way through the house, it's not leap through the window and escape. It's all right, let me get my gun and put a couple shots through the door. That's
empty a clip, maybe.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
empty the revolver, right? And just bam, bam, bam. And this is not a woman that
Well,
is
she referred to it as
shirking
an
away from it.
automatic. It was very bizarre.
Oh, that's right. It was not automatic.
Yeah.
Well, that's right, because this story is kind of contemporary to when it was written. It takes place. I believe the beginning is during World War I, and then we jump to after.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yes, technologically
that
speaking,
would
yeah.
fit. Yeah.
So
Yeah, folks, that was all in Act 1. Yeah, as you could tell, Bob and I really, really, really liked Act 1. Act 2 was a little tougher to get through.
see, now I disagree. So when I read this, I read the first three chapters, and then I sat down and I read the rest of it. And yes, the second act, there's a lot of dread, right? It builds a lot of suspense, a lot of dread. It is kind of the darkness of dark fantasy. There's a whole lot of atmosphere. You know something's coming, and it's not just coming one more time, because then you see the second visitation and you go back to the table of contents, you're like, wait, there's a third and there's a fourth. It just keeps, things keep happening, things keep coming. And
but in slow motion, man, you guys got to understand, when I get nervous and I'm reading, I eat. It's not good. I ate a lot. I was so nervous. I'm like, just come on, let's get to the good part.
But see, for me, that kind of was the good part.
It was good, but it was nerve-wracking with no closure.
Well, it was certainly building, right? And if you actually look at, if you stop and look at the way the book is structured, you can kind of see the ebb and flow of this week in Argosy and this week in Argosy. It certainly, if it has a flow based on its serialization, but she doesn't just pad pages. All right, there's all sorts of little things. You mentioned the shadow people, but there's also the great moment where Colin's sister Cleona is reading The Island of Dr. Moreau. And
Colin was reading it too while he went back to the house.
Yeah. And so you've got these people that are reading this story, and then it kind of comes into play. It is not just a throwaway detail when all of a sudden he's attacked by this man-like thing that reaches down from the trees to try and strangle him, which it was when it was later republished. There is a beautiful illustration of that scene with Khan reaching down out of the tree and holding him by the neck and pulling him up. There was some,
it is. Yes.
And so it fits. She didn't there, while there's certainly no wasted prose, there's no padding, there's no real fluff. Everything is sort of setting up what is to come. All of the interactions with the police, which are frustratingly
I really could have just given two bits about them. I kick them out of the story. We don't need them. They're useless. We've established this. Let's move on. Why are they back? Okay, Act 3, one of them kind of, well, I guess both of them redeem themselves for, yeah, but
for their own
Act
reasons,
2.
right?
Wow.
I mean, that's kind of the thing. So Act 2 really is, it's sort of establishing our new location. It's establishing our new location is kind of a misnomer, because we're never really told where they're at, right? They're just town.
North Carolina-ish.
They're somewhere in the United States where there's water and there's trees, and that's really all we've got.
We do meet Mr. Reed, Mr. Chester T. Reed, who is new to town, and he bought this house because nobody really wanted it, since the old owner hanged himself there or something. So it went really cheap and the new guy in town could get it.
Yeah, so now we have mysterious newcomer in town lives in the cursed house.
With
and
the
so
Van Dyke beard.
Yes. And which I greatly appreciate.
And glasses. The beard and glasses.
I greatly appreciated the use of Van Dyke, because that's fallen out of favor. But what so many people refer to as a goatee is a Van Dyke. A goatee has no mustache, right? So so it was nice to see that little detail. It just pleased me. Okay, I'll just.
Well, and the minute it was mentioned that it was a beard and a set of glasses, and just the offhand familiarity this guy showed, I was like, I know who that is.
I so did not pick up on that, and I really should have.
I
From
love
all those years of Star Trek Mirror Universe references, how do you make someone
Right.
evil, right? You just give them a mustache, and yeah.
I told you it's a precursor to superheroes.
Yes, he did. Yes, the Clark Kent glasses. So Chester Reed and his menagerie of unseen animals and feeder sheep.
And his albino servant, Marco.
Yes. Yeah. Who was really, God, he was
Unsettling.
creepy. Yes. He was so unsettling. I would say that the way he was written moist, right? That's just, you just got that feeling that this guy is covered with a sheen.
God. Thanks,
A pre-Innsmouth look, Innsmouth look. He was just awful.
Yeah. So chapter 20, which is the end of Act 2, ends. It
ends like chapter 10 does. Dun dun dun.
On a huge cliffhanger, and I had to tap out prior to chapter 20 in my first sitting, so I chewed it up all at once, and then okay, I've got to put it down. Must have been the beginning of chapter 20 when I picked it up again, and that ending made me go, you did not. And okay, now we're speed reading through the end, because we've got to do this. Yeah.
Yikes. It just as Sky 2's with me, right? The revelation of the shipments of feeble livestock was genuinely creepy, and it was. He's not buying.
And I'm thinking, is it food or is it?
Oh, it was definitely food.
Fuel.
The moment I saw, like, this is not livestock. These are feeder sheep, much like people have feeder mice for snakes. And I was just kind of wondering what he was feeding.
Besides Genghis Khan?
Yeah,
the
right.
Giant
the giant white ape thing. Yeah.
That wasn't trying to mimic the Guardians of the City at all, I'm sure.
It's
wow.
Well, and it kind of, you hit that, right? It was kind of a mocking parody of the Guardians. Yeah. Because as we kind of learn later as we move into Act 3 that really Genghis Khan was not born so much as fashioned. And
well, yeah. Okay, now I also need to point out that during all of the encounters, sorry, that was my book clamping down there. During all of the encounters with Mr. Reed, his hand was in his jacket pocket. And, my brain goes to, oh, great. So he's also the shifter, and something didn't quite shift right. And because the idea of shapeshifters or werewolves or something had been thrown out there
yes, it had
in here. And so that's what I'm thinking. And lovable old Boots, sorry, Colin at this time, he dropped the nickname, thought surely he has a gun in his pocket. And as it turned out, we were both wrong, but I was at least half right. It was no gun. It was a white furred, what looked like a glove. It looked like the hand of that ape-like creature.
Yeah.
That attacked him. And man, are we really going down this road? Survey says no, we are not. And I was legitimately thrown for the second major loop, because after the home was demolished, the home of his sister, or pretty well
Right.
trashed, and she had that breakdown, and nobody but Colin believed her when she told what she had seen.
To be fair, Colin had a frame of reference that everybody else was lacking, right?
That is perfectly fair. But he made big plans to go out on another expedition to find gold and find the treasure, and was reportedly going down to Buenos Aires, and instead hitched a train an hour north and went back to the old house. I did not see that coming.
Well, to me, I think he was doing that specifically as sort of I'm going to mislead these people that I'm leaving,
Like
and I'm going to circle back, and I'm going to get them, right?
Yeah,
and
that's fair too.
that sort of fits the heroism when he's goes back to Reed's home, and he has at this point met Reed's daughter, who was never really named either, and is presumably
Right.
there's something wrong with her, and in his mind she is immediately the Dusk Lady, and so he ends up rescuing her as well. Matter of fact,
she's never given a name.
No, she's not, but with the illustrations again, I think Elena, I think it's image number 2. There is an image of the rescue that shows her in the diaphanous green gown, and Khan reaching through the window as he is catching her. She is leaping out of a window, dropping down, and he doesn't move. He just catches her.
He just solidly caught her. Yeah. In this gown that's like shredded to bits and so painstakingly,
and she won't change out of it, and we don't find out why until late in the third act.
Until really late, yeah, when she finally says more than like 2 words at a time. Now, to her credit, Sister Cleona takes this lady in and is so very kind to her, and I have to wonder if she sees a little bit of herself in that, because she was also broken, and the Dusk Lady was presumed to be insane, or at least not all there. And
she was introduced that way, and certainly felt that way. Yeah.
She would only tell Colin her story, and Colin had to leave before he heard it. So she is actually the first person to go to Colin's rescue during our finale.
Yes. Now, as
Cleona leads the second wave of rescue,
and as we
pretty badass.
So now, as we move into the third act, and we discover the identity of Chester Reed, which I had not, right? I was like, wait, Khan. They're calling him Genghis Khan, but Kennedy. Maybe, oh my God, the last time we saw Kennedy, something bad was happening. Maybe. No. I really fell for it. Yeah, so.
No, that's actually kind of awesome. What I didn't get was the fact that there was a man with white hair that kept trying to interrupt Colin as he was on his rampage. And I didn't realize who that was until he made himself known to the sister. And I was like, oh man, I feel dumb.
It's funny. Again, I mentioned that the book is definitely structured. It's 3 acts. It's structured like a movie. And so you've got this guy. Hey, wait. Hey. Just keeps popping up, keeps trying to catch him. Don't have time. Don't have time. And to me, that was, I could so see that. That's sort of the comic relief that turns out to be not so comic.
The pacing for the third act, I will say, picks right the heck up.
I mean,
until you stall with the villain's monologue, but even that is pretty fast-paced.
Any good villain is allowed a villain justification speech.
Well, and Colin is obviously just irritated and bored with it, so he keeps trying to interrupt and say, move it along, come on, get to the point.
Get to where you kill me. Come on, let's go.
And Kennedy says no.
Yeah, the entire time he's beaten, he's tied up, and now I'm going to turn you into one of my creatures. Yeah, can we get to the part where you turn me into a creature, because you're really kind of boring me with everything you're telling me, and I really don't care. I just don't like you.
Yeah, you did what to this city? You wrecked the entire Mexican city, or the city in Mexico.
Yeah,
What? No.
Yeah, he took the whole thing out, and now I will rule the world through my monsters. Now let's just think about that for a moment, right? I'm going to make an army of monsters that breed like mad, and I'm going to throw them out into the world because they will listen to me. Now, this is not one of the best thought through villain plans that I've ever come across, right? I mean, that's sort of like, okay, well, I've got 1,000 atomic bombs, and I'm going to just keep setting them off until you obey me. But you live here too, and so when you wipe everything out, you can't control and he really didn't care. And as we find out, it's because Reed himself is not Kennedy himself. He's Tezcatlipoca in the form of Nacauyatl, right? Who is the creator of hatreds. He is possessed by a god, bent on the ruination of the world.
And in his, I don't want to say drug induced, but it's some substance that is applied to his skin that causes him to kind of black out and hallucinate. Colin, that is.
Well, but
he sees the gods,
right? But he's not. Gods. He's not hallucinating. That's the thing. So it's never really named. It's the thin, like purple fluid that is spread over the skin so that it begins the process. And he's got a little bit on him, and it opens his mind. It opens his brain to the images that are conveniently shown in Citadel Image 3, which Elena also has. Where we not only
his
have
eyelids were clear. Yeah,
we not only have Quetzalcoatl, but we have Amun-Ra of Egypt. We have Apollo. We have all of these gods coming forward.
Wow,
that are all here to stop the end of the world at the hands of the creator of hatreds, right? They're like, hey, we've got this deal. You don't do this sort of thing. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to do this thing.
And is it just me, or does that image look strikingly like the same pose for the cover of the Patrons of Lankmar? Sorry. Yeah, all of them. Yeah. Anyway,
arc toad-like thing. Yeah. Well, if you look down at the bottom, there is sort of a cat-like thing, right? So Doug likes putting cat-like things in there.
Please tell me I was not the only one who saw the face of Babug Bilils with the big, large, leering toad face.
Well, see, so for me, out of pulps, it's Tsathoggua, which is the Lovecraftian toad deity. But certainly, I had that sort of imagery in my head, and so you have the gods are now intervening with rain and wind, which so explained what happened with the gatekeeper guardian monster. At first I thought it was really cheesy when all of a sudden it's snaking towards Cleona, and she doesn't know it's there, and then a stick impales it to the ground. I was like, well, that's kind of weird, but then it's revealed why. It was from the storm, but it was still really convenient until you realize the gods are directly intervening, and that's why it happened. And so you get this kind of building crescendo, and then there's kind of the physical cacophonic release of all of the creatures that had been created pouring out and at them as they're fighting for their very lives. Conveniently, image 4.
And the imagery of the way Colin is bound by the snake or by something. It almost, the way the text reads, it was almost as if the snake was swallowing him whole.
Well, see, for me, I took it more as like a constrictor, right? Because every time he was exhaling, it was crushing down even further.
And then he saw
And
the face just getting nearer and nearer to the top of
right,
the face.
right. So it was more like it was wrapped around him, and you had the snake's head kind of coming up, and he's lying in the bowl to be transformed. And there's and in a way, you can, if one wants to wax philosophical, right? He's in this bowl almost like he's waiting to be reborn at the end of the story. And he sort of is, as he,
I mean,
now he
there's definitely
perceives the
religious impact.
gods, he perceives the gods, he sees the struggle, and what's he gonna do? He's gonna punch things to death, because that's what Colin does. He punches things to death. I mean, come on, you know, he punched Marcus to death with one punch.
Accidentally.
Marco, one punch breaks his neck.
Marco, or what was the full name he was given? It turned out he was the fledgling priest, or the priest in training, who had been sent there to perform that ritual and noticed the ill omens and kept going with it anyway.
But he was there because he was promised the Dusk Lady, right? Reed/Kennedy's daughter. You know, he was the creepy moist stalker.
Well, wait, was he? No, he wasn't promised the Dusk Lady. He was promised the
Dusk Lady is the same figure.
Lady.
The Dusk Lady, straight out of the caption. Even he the moment he sees her as a woman, she is the Dusk Lady.
Once they came to America,
yes, she is the Dusk Lady, and he, you know, and he wanted her, and so that's why he was there. I was confusing it
with the people in our Aztec city.
Right.
Because there was another set of betrothals that got busted.
Yes. Yes. The Moth Lady who her husband, who had claimed Colin for Quetzalcoatl, emerges as almost this godly figure himself, reiterating Quetzalcoatl's claim to Colin. That none other shall have him, none other shall break the agreement and transgress. And so you just have this kind of whirlwind. And when I realized the gods were getting involved, I was like, oh, so we're going to get all this way, and then the gods are going to resolve everything, and that's going to be kind of disappointing. And that's not what happened either. No. And the gods got involved, and certainly the gods did do some heavy lifting, like of the roof, for example. But all of our characters coming together at the end, including our previously useless police officers.
Yes.
Who then, yes. And I kind of love the wind down. It's like, okay, I almost pictured him like Columbo at that moment, right? Okay, so just bear with me here. So what happened was, it's just and then there was these monsters. There were monsters. There were monsters, and he doesn't back down. He's like, this is my truth.
Telling his story, and there's the chief trying to rein him back in. No, get back to these monsters.
I'll get there, but it's that moment of, he too is transformed. He, the actions of gods do not leave anyone untouched or unchanged.
Well, and here I have to go back to one of the warnings that Sven Bjornsson gave Colin, back in the first act. Don't ever take a knee to any of them.
He was like, you're a good Christian boy, right? I'm Catholic. Don't bow your head to another person's gods. And that was certainly even more telling. At first it kind of comes off as just, well, you're a Christian, don't nod to pagans. But it really kind of comes down to, then you look at his experiences, where he had found these people, and he had married in, and now he was their subject, and his entire life had changed. And so that entire warning takes on a different tone. But then the gods show up, and I'm sorry, Quetzalcoatl shows up in front of me, and I'm going to be at least a little respectful, right? I mean, normally when people say don't bow to other people's gods, it's because they don't believe in those gods, but they're real. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I also appreciate the wind down at the end of the story where it says she essentially says there doesn't need to be a continuation of this tale. Our story can end here.
Yes, but it has an ending, right? It's not like da 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 da, and then we end.
It's not quite cute.
It's not quite keep. So we get kind of that cool down period, and I cannot stress enough how much I greatly enjoyed this story. Like I said, I can going in at the beginning, I was sort of comparing this to Lovecraft's The Mound, which is
That's
a
what
lot
you were saying
a lot darker, a lot creepier, and the kind of lost or forgotten tribe is certainly more alien and disgusting and foul. But this was so much better in my brain when I'd made that comparison. I'm like, oh no, this is much better than The Mound.
Yeah, you kept
This
telling me it was so much like The Mound, and I went into it dreading it.
well,
honestly.
no,
It
but
read so much easier.
yes, well, I went into it comparing it to The Mound. It wasn't really like The Mound, other than those initial similarities. But this story alone is enough to put Gertrude Bennett at the top of my favorite authors list. I mean, this story
Yay!
blew me away, and again, it
We
was such an
have the
easy read.
listeners, and we have our listeners to thank for that.
That is true, because they
I
help us
may
pick
have
our
been, like,
stories.
I may have been weighing the vote a little. No, I didn't contribute any bits or anything to weigh the vote, but
You just encourage them to. Yeah, I know.
honestly, the story of the author intrigued me more than her. I hadn't read anything by her yet, so I wanted that impetus. And while I was waiting for this book to arrive, I actually hit, I think, 2 of the short stories in a separate collection that I was able to pick up. And
Because
I will be on,
listeners, if nothing else, we've got books.
I will be on the lookout for the more archival quality covers and the original paperback still. But I'll be the first to admit I got what I could get now.
And
to my door right now. And
it
it's the
was
same
well
thing.
worth it. Yeah.
Yes, there are some typos. Yes, there are some places that got, why is there an extra apostrophe there? But no, those aside, I'm just going, we could clean this up, make it nice and minty fresh, but that was almost part of the charm, was reading it as it was written.
Well, whether or not I did not lay hands on the Argosy issues, so those could have been artifacts from them.
That's true. Some of it may have been artifacts from the PDFs or something.
But, well, from whatever the publisher used when they were creating it. Yeah.
But I want that paperback with the beautifully multicolored art on there with
the Aztec. Yeah, no, there's again, it's in the public domain. People should be doing stuff with this. I mean, it is right for any all sorts of material, including nicer versions of the book. But yes. So as we talk about books in general, maybe we should transition to talking about our next book, right? Because I'd like to know what we're reading next.
Yeah, that'd be a real big help, wouldn't it? That would be for our Twitch mistress to help us out with.
So we have our poll for our May 17th show.
Drop down arrow, you'll see our 4 choices.
So we have Margaret Sinclair's Dolphins of Altair, which I really want to read because it's part of the unofficial trilogy that follows the Shadow People. Zena Henderson.
Yep.
And The Pilgrimage, the Book of the People, the first of those works.
There's C.L. Moore with Jirel of Joiry, if I pronounce that correctly. And there's also Lady Margaret Cavendish. I'm not going to give this one up yet because this also really sounds intriguing to me. Oh, shoot.
Which is the Blazing World from
Yeah.
1666.
No, we have the wrong option for the poll. She grabbed the poll before I changed it. That's okay. That's okay. It'll be on the next one. So that last choice instead of Miriam Allen DeFord should read Lady Margaret Cavendish, because the Blazing World published in 1666.
But she's not a poll option, so maybe I'll get to read the Dolphins of Altair.
That's true. Maybe I could weigh that one for you.
Oh, wait, I need to vote.
Yeah, don't forget to vote yourself. Come on. Can't give me a hard time for reading something you didn't want to read. Although, honestly,
it's not that I don't want to read. It's not that I don't want to read the Blazing World. I want to read all of these.
That I'm not like really excited about, and that might sound kind of silly too.
Drillatory is kind of an important tale on its own, but I'm going to push for Dolphins of Altair, because my God, the number of times I've seen the Dolphins of Altair, when this whole concept of an unofficial, because it's not an official trilogy, right? It's an unofficial trilogy set in the near future California. And we're going to read Margaret Sinclair.
Wish.
So for our next episode, we are going to read The Dolphins of Altair by Margaret Sinclair.
Which also means going back to Appendix N a little bit more officially, because she at least appears on it.
Yes.
She's one of 3 women on Appendix N. And
yes,
I'm not here to bang the feminist drum. I'm just, representation is important.
Well, no, and honestly, this is a major portion of our literary past that most people, including, I mean, I read a lot, and I had never heard the name Zena Henderson until you mentioned it to me. There's so much out there, and there's so many
research.
Yeah, there's so many great voices, and they influenced a lot of people that followed. And so, no, I'm totally on board for this ride. It's not really beating a drum so much as lifting the scales from my eyes.
Now somebody, I'm gonna try to pronounce that, and I can't. Fuzraden redeemed points here on the Twitch channel to get a random joke or fact. So, Bob, give us one of them.
Random fact. Sure, put me on the spot for a random fact. Okay, a random fact. A random fact. You can, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, you can fish and actually catch fish if you dig deeply enough, because the sands of the Sahara beneath are crisscrossed by freshwater rivers and streams that still bear fish. There is your random fact.
That is quite random. You have
right?
delivered. Thank you.
I am nothing if not a font of useless knowledge.
Oh, we've got a listener or two that might agree.
And that is actually from the book Trivia, which was published, I want to say, in 78.
Yeah, we really do need to play more trivia nights, Bob.
We still have it on our shelves. Yeah, but the trivia I have isn't useful trivia. They right. Who scored this touchdown? I don't know, but I can catch fish in the Sahara.
Right on. Yeah.
Saharan Fish was my retro disco band in college. Yeah, there we go. Disco wasn't retro for God bless. Old.
And actually, I would put it to our listeners to send us some ideas if they know of other women authors around this era.
Well, I wouldn't say even around this era. If we were going back to 1666, it's not just an
pre-1990 then, or pre-1980 would be a good point.
Yeah, especially people that have been overlooked, right? I mean, that's
exactly. Yes, we know we haven't done Ursula Le Guin yet. We haven't done Anne McCaffrey.
Although those are also people that are very, very well known.
Exactly.
Margaret Sinclair is on Appendix N and still really isn't all that well known today.
Exactly.
Like I
Barbara
said, I'd never
Hambly
heard
is
of.
kind of a, depending on the genre, mystery, she's really big, sci-fi, not so much.
Well, in horror, she's really good with too. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
there's a lot of people, but she's more kind of the after wave, right? She's in that wave of people that were influenced by the authors of Appendix N and those who came before.
That's true.
And so
We
it's
could easily
really,
set like 1960 as our cutoff then.
yeah, it's some of this older stuff is fascinating. Now, The Blazing World is probably going to be a bit of a read because English has changed.
But it's
You know,
also a short story, which helps.
it's a quasi short story. It's its own book.
And Other Stories is the one that I had pinpointed.
But so yeah, and we're not, and
I'm
I
going to
mean,
continue
eventually
to read
we'll,
more
yeah,
of Frances Stevens.
yeah, and eventually we'll transition from where we're at. But this series of shows that we're doing right now is, to me, it's been fascinating, and hopefully it is fascinating to our listeners and our folks with us live as we go.
And if anybody is interested, I did find Frances Stevens on Audible. So you can find the Citadel of Fear, you can find The Nightmare, her more horror-oriented stories on
Well, and
Audible.
if you've got Prime, if you have Prime, Citadel of Fear is free for Kindle. And the Audible is like $1.64. So
right, it's not worth using a point if you've got an Audible membership.
So
but it is available in multiple avenues depending on your comfort level. I know that sometimes it's easier to listen to a book.
Oh, and let's face it, it's a lot of the stuff that we're covering is not stuff that's easy to find in your local used bookstore.
Unfortunately.
So
yeah.
So I think that is going to kind of wrap us up for the evening. Thank you, folks, for joining us. It's always nice to have folks here with us as we're doing the show.
And our next show will be approximately a month from now. It will be the third Tuesday of May, which puts us on the 17th, and we'll be here on the same channel at 9 p.m.
So thank you very much, everyone, and be inspired. Have a good night.
Good night.